Hey everyone, welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, 2021, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Intopia, Fable, TPGI Arc, and Adobe, as well as our Gold supporter, Tetralogical. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24Conf, and if you have questions for the presenters, please tweet them using the hashtag ID24 for our Q&A at the end of the session. And now I'm thrilled to be joined by our guest host, Svea Siegman. Svea, over to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to introduce Johan Hockman. I hope I got that right. Speaking about better quality of life through apps. And now I'll turn it over to Johan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are or whenever you are. I'm going to talk about better quality of life through apps, but a picture says more than 1,000 words. So I'll try to describe a picture for you in less than 1,000 words. In this picture, you see two men. On the right is a young man and he's staring at his phone. He's looking at his phone actually, but he's not directly looking at it. He's looking through a matte piece of plastic. So his view is obstructed by the plastic. On the left, you see another man, slightly older, and he is looking down. It's not clear what he's looking at, but it looks like he's staring. And if you would be able to zoom in a bit closer, you could see that there's something with his eye. It looks like he has a visual impairment. I'm showing the picture right now, and I hope I described it well for you. The man on the left is called Jeroen, and Jeroen actually has had a visual impairment since he was young. And this picture was taken during a usability test we conducted at my office in Amsterdam. And just before the test, Jeroen came up to me and he asked me for a plastic insert cover. And I assumed it was to hold a document or something. But after the test, a colleague came up to me and he showed me this picture he took during the test. And it all became clear to me what he was trying to achieve. He wanted to let the designer, the young man on the right, experience how he experienced his app. And this image perfectly illustrates what I want to talk about with you today. Because is it possible for you or me as a site designer to create something for someone who experiences the world, who experiences apps or digital media in general in a totally different way than you yourself? And is it possible for you or me to create something that makes life a bit better for someone else if this person experiences in a totally different way than yourself? But before I dive into that, I'd like to introduce myself a bit more. My name is Johan Houtman. I'm an accessibility engineer at Q42 in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And I've been an accessibility engineer for almost 15 years right now. In this talk, I will, mostly talk about creating an experience for people who are blind, because somewhere during this talk, I will show you two products I created that were aimed at the very specific target audience, people with visual impairments, and the way to get there. So, but before we get there, first I like to, talk with you about the current status of how people who are blind experience digital media right now. After that, we'll enter the realm of accessibility, because these are sort of the ground rules for if you want to create anything for everyone. And I'll show you some of the methods I use to gain a better understanding how anyone experiences the product you are creating. So let's start with the big question. What is a great user experience for somebody who is blind? And the answer to the question comes from one of the organizers of this event, Miss Leonie Watson herself, because she got a similar question during an interview she was doing in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And I was there, and well, the exact question was, what is a delightful user experience for someone who's blind? And her answer was very brief, but very clear: if it works. And it sounds very sad, but that's just the current status of if you're blind, how you probably experience media, how you experience the internet. And I don't know how it was with you, but creating stuff that just works is not my ambition. And I guess it's not your ambition, given the fact that you're joining this conference on inclusive design. I think everybody who's here wants to create stuff for everyone. We want to create awesome stuff for everyone. But how do you do that if the person who you're creating it for, has a totally different view or totally different experience with digital media than yourself? And I think we have to talk about the ground rules first. And I think if we're talking about creating stuff for everyone, we're talking about accessibility. And of course, there are guidelines on that, but there are also some things I learned in the past few years about accessibility that I want to share. And maybe some of the things are kind of preaching to the choir, or maybe you're already familiar with that, but I have to talk about these ground rules because I think they're very important if you want to create something awesome for everyone. Let's start with, well, I will fire some quotes to you at you from things that I learned the past few years. First, accessibility actually is usability. I've done a talk 5 years ago, also for Inclusive Design 24, that exactly covered this subject. So you can watch that, of course. But I'll explain what I mean. Like I said, I'm an accessibility engineer. I can create something that's technically completely accessible, but not usable for example, a voiceover user. One moment, please. Yeah, sorry, somebody slacked me and I thought it was one of the presenters, but it's not. Accessibility is actually usability, because an issue with accessibility is that most of it is to fix it is done under the hood. So as a designer, it's out of your sight, literally, and that's why the usability part of accessibility most of the time is not addressed. So to make something really usable for everybody, you not only need a developer, you also need a designer, but you need more. You need a whole team. So accessibility is actually a shared responsibility. You not only need a designer, you also need a copywriter, you need a project manager, anybody who is on the team. Everybody has his own responsibility to create a fully accessible product. You especially need your product owner or your client to have your back as soon as difficult decisions have to be made on accessibility. And that's where it can get kind of tough, because to have everybody on board, everybody in the team on board, when you want to create something accessible, you need to convince people. And that's difficult. And there are some convincing numbers out there that you can use. The World Health Organization says about 50% of the population has some form of disability. But in my experience, these numbers, well, don't stick with my clients. I can tell them 50% of the world population has some form of disability, about 25% in the Netherlands has some form of disability. And they say, well, these people don't use my apps. Why would a blind person even use my app? That sort of answers is what you get back. So we need more. And I think one of the ways is to make it more personal. Anybody will arrive at some point in their lives where they need that somebody has thought of accessibility in, well, the things they're using. And this might work, but I think what even works better is showing the data. And I have some data that are very convincing, or have proved to be convincing to some of my clients. Last year at Q42, we conducted a research. We conducted a research amongst 1.5 million iPhone users. And how did we do that? We embedded a script to some of our apps, and all the script did was checking what accessibility features do you have turned on. And the outcome of that was, well, more than we expected and very convincing. And I'll show some of the outcomes to you right now. This is just very briefly what we found. And I will share an URL later on where you can have a look at these numbers at your own pace. For now, what I'd like to say that 43%, almost half of the people surveyed, uses one or more accessibility settings on their iPhone. And next to this 43%, I'm showing now a short list of the most commonly used settings. Like I said, I will share a URL so you can have a look at them at your own pace, but I will, well, talk about the top two, just highlight them. For example, 33% adjust the text size. Like I said, 1.5 million people, 33% is about 500,000. That's even more than the people that have a visual impairment in the Netherlands that we know of. Probably has to do with the aging of the population. Another thing is dark modes. 27% of the people use dark modes. And you may argue with me, dark mode is not strictly speaking an accessibility feature. I like to think of it that way because I know that a lot of people with visual impairments are very sensitive to light and prefer dark mode. If you have trouble concentrating, trouble with keeping your focus, dark mode is your drug of choice. And these are not difficult things to implement or difficult things to support in your app. So like I said before, these numbers were very convincing to the clients where we added the script in their apps for. They all of a sudden made totally different decisions on the point of accessibility. So let's say, oh, you have your whole team aligned. Everybody is convinced that accessibility is important and you are ready to start and create awesome stuff for your target audience. Where do you start? Well, it's very easy to forget who you're doing it for while you're busy squashing bugs, meeting deadlines, and well, in and out of meetings or style guides or whatsoever. You forget who you're doing it for, the people you're doing it for. So you have to find ways to incorporate those people in your everyday routine. I found a few ways that work in our everyday routine, and I like to share them for you. And I like to call them rum, roast, and roger. And they are really as fun as they sound. So let's start with the rum. What is rum? In our case, rum is real user mornings, and it's a kind of speed date with real users. So we have 5 users come over to our office. We have 5 teams, and every team gets 15 minutes with every user, a speed date. And this is the perfect vehicle to, well, challenge your assumptions, test a small piece of your app, or, well, and with anybody. A rum is, for example, where I learned that dark mode is very often used by people who are sensitive to light. So that's one. Then next one is the roast. What's the roast? Well, in this picture you see Leonie Watson again, because she was the first person who did the roast at Q42 a few years ago. The roast is when I invite experts to come over to criticize our work, and especially experts on accessibility, because we know we're not doing it right all the time. We want to do it right, so that's why we invite experts, tell them what we're doing wrong, but also invite them to tell them what we have to do to make it better. And we do this every now and then, very infrequently, but well, we've done it a couple of times in the past few years, and it works really well. And finally, Roger. In this picture, you see a man standing next to a statue. And this man is Roger, and he's a sculptor, but he hasn't always been a sculptor. A sculptor. And 10 years ago, he worked for the government until he was diagnosed with macular degeneration. So he had to reevaluate his life and what he wanted to do with it. And I met him during this process, and he asked me, can I come over to the office every now and then, because I want to learn more about internet and technology. And of course, he was welcome, and we arranged that he would come over to our office every 2 weeks. And I let him meet some of the teams, talk to designers, developers, product owners, and as they taught him more about internet and technology, he told them about how he experienced the products that we were making. So in order to create something for someone, to create something awesome for someone or for anyone specific or for everyone, you need these persons to be around in any sort of way. And these are only 3 ways you can do it. It's the way that I've incorporated it in our daily routines, to have people around, to specifically, if you're working on a specific product for a specific audience, have them there so they can, and have them in every part of the process. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I have to show you the pudding right now. 2 projects I've been working on in the past year, where we try to create the best possible experience for a very specific target group. First one is SenseMath. What is SenseMath? SenseMath is an app for iOS that translates mathematical formula into sound. And the target audience for this one is blind high school students. And the goal is to make it possible for them to interpret a graph just as quickly as the sighted fellow students can. Because as you may imagine, math is already very difficult. Math also uses a lot of visual stuff to explain difficult concepts. So if you're blind, you're already, well, not 1, maybe 10 nil behind. And there's a lot of material that you can use, tactile material, but lots of times this takes ages to interpret the graph. So we thought of, what if we use sound for that? And this is not my idea. The idea came from Visio. And what is Visio? Visio is the Dutch expertise center on visual impairments. And it's quite big. And they have schools, residential groups, and also a lot of experts. And while working with Visio, we had access to students, teachers, and a lot of experts. And so Ethering was there to create something really, really great for this group of students, for the blind high school students. For example, we had these 2 people, these 2 guys on our team. On the left, you see Jesse. He is an accessibility consultant. And on the right, you see Lisa, and he is a ICT consultant. They are both blind and they work with Visio. And they were there all the time, being part of our team and pushing us to the limits of anything possible with VoiceOver to create the best possible experience for users of VoiceOver. Because that was important. We wanted to create the best possible experience. And they kept on pushing. And well, I'll show you some of the things we achieved together with them. SenseMath is best experienced with your ears. So let's listen to a simple graph in SenseMath, how this sounds. Where's my mouse? There. So that's what a simple graph in SenseMath sounds like. And I'm showing you the graph right now, a visual representation. It's a parabola with the top down. So it's a valley-shaped parabola. And so you heard, of course, the shape of the parabola, but what you also heard was the steps on the x-axis. And if you list, well, maybe you already noticed there was some kind of white noise. This is when the graph goes below 0. And for the mathematicians among us, the formula for this graph was y equals x squared minus 6 times x plus 5. Like I said, there's a lot going on here, and I will let you listen to some more graphs, and hopefully you will get better at it. Next, I will let you listen to 2 graphs who are almost similar, but not completely. And I wonder if you can hear the difference. So first, let's listen to the first one. I'll describe it. This was a straight line going from bottom left to top right. Now you know that. Let's listen to the second one, which is almost the same, but has a subtle difference. And I wonder if you can hear the subtle difference and also tell what the difference is. These are two graphs you just heard, you just listened to. On the left, the straight line, bottom left, top right. On the right, also a graph moving from bottom left to top right, but it has a little bend in the middle where it follows the x-axis for just a brief moment. You can imagine that you need to hear the subtle differences when you're doing math. So sound is very important. And I'm not gonna dive too much into it right now because it's a whole talk on its own, but we spend a lot of time finding the right sound. Finding a sound that offers, well, the possibility to hear every small bend, twist, turn whatsoever in a graph and still was easy on the ears. But like I said, that's totally different talk. So I want to move on to another graph. Actually, again, two graphs, which you will hear right after each other. Listen very carefully. I will let you hear it more than once, but there's a lot going on here. So listen very carefully. I will then show you what you just listened to, and then we'll listen to it again. Like the two graphs in two formulas in one graph. Again, a straight line moving from bottom left to top right. That's the first one you heard. And then you heard the second one, hill-shaped parabola this time. And you hear a lot more. You hear, of course, you hear the step size, you hear when they were below zero, but you also heard some other sounds. One of them, more of them, were the different intersections between the graphs. You hear also where the graphs intersect with the y-axis. And if you listen very carefully, you also would have heard the top of the parabola. This is not the first graph a student hears when he's starting with math. This is something you hear about maybe in the end of the first, maybe the second year. So you've listened to a lot of sounds before that. First, you will learn about the axis and the grid. Then, of course, you will move to the straight lines. And then after that to the parabola. And until you hear this, you've had a lot of airtime with SenseMod already. So you don't have to learn it all in 10 minutes, just like you have to do today. So let's listen to this graph again and see if you can distinct all the different sounds. And there's a lot more in SenseMod that I want you to hear, but just for the sake of time, I'm moving on because I also want to tell you a bit about the features we, excuse me, about some features we built into the app and why we built them. I invite you to download the app. It's freely available for everyone, and there are a lot more examples in the app that you can listen to. Right now, I'm showing the heart of the app, which is the screen where you can listen to a graph. And again, this screen shows a visual representation of the graph, which especially is handy for a teacher or somebody who's helping you with your homework. Below that, you see the mathematical formula. And below that, you see some information about the axis, the minima, the maxima, the step size. And then on the bottom, you see a play bar. A play bar just in the same spot as that you used to in Spotify or in Apple Music, whatsoever. There's a play bar. It contains 3 options, or 3 buttons actually. Of course, the play and pause button, which if you know, it also works with the Magic Tab, just like in Spotify or in Apple Music. And on the left, you see a small icon. And if you, in VoiceOver, it will tell you that this is the button for the play speed. If you are a seasoned SenseMod user, you probably want to crank up the speed a bit. But if you want to hear more details, you probably want to slow down a bit. So that's why we added the play speed. On the right, you see another button, and this will tell you it is the settings. This is the place where you can toggle on and off the different sounds. So if you only want to hear the shape, you can toggle off any other sound. And of course, this opens a screen with all different toggles, but there's an easier way of turning on and off the sounds. Because at some point in the interface, you will hear this.
Use the rotor to access steps on x-axis, maxima and minima, intersections between graphs, below the x-axis.
You can use the VoiceOver rotor. And for those of you who don't know what the VoiceOver rotor is, when you have VoiceOver turned on, it's kind of a power user function. That's the way I like to think about it. And if you have VoiceOver turned on, you put 2 fingers on the screen and make a gesture like if you're turning a knob, like this, the VoiceOver rotor will appear. And it's a kind of quick access to different settings in VoiceOver. I knew it existed, but I didn't know you were also able to customize it. So if you open SenseMod, some extra settings will be added to it, like turning on and off the different sounds. Very easy. So if you're listening to a graph, turning off and on and off sound is literally at your fingertips. Another thing, a feature I want to show you is the custom keyboard. For those of you who have ever tried to enter a mathematical formula on their iOS keyboard, it's a hell of a job. And it contains a lot of switching between different keyboard layouts, especially if you're a VoiceOver user, it's almost undoable. That's why we created a custom keyboard that contains all the characters you need to enter a mathematical formula. Especially handy if you're used to touch typing. And if you don't know what touch typing is, well, to easily put it, when you're using VoiceOver and you want to touch type, you put your finger on the screen, you move it along the different keys, and it reads out every different key to you. And as soon as you're on a key and you lift your finger, that's a hit. So then that's, like a tap or a click on a key. So much more I want to share, so much more features. And like I said, I invite you to download the app and try it for yourself. It's freely available for everybody. One more thing, if you're a student, you want it to be part of your daily routine. So if a teacher tells you, go to this and this page in your book, and we go to that and that graph, you also want it to be there in SenseMod already. So that's why we now have been able to add about 90% of the math books in the Netherlands to this app. Hoping to add the last 10% also. And it contains every graph in the book translated into sound. And let's move on to another project we did with Visio. And the project, I will say the name only once, because if I say it, Google Homes everywhere around the world will suddenly trigger. The project was called Hey Google. Okay, that's the last time I will say it. And one of the things we did for this project sounded like this.
Welkom in het piratenverhaal.
As you probably noticed, it's in Dutch, but I translated for you. It's called The Pirate Story, and it's a game we created for Google Home. what was this project? I think this project was the perfect example of incorporating your target audience in every possible way. And it's a project we did with some residents of one of Visio residential groups. And they called it a dream team. And it existed of about 6 persons who had multiple disabilities. Besides being blind, they also had an intellectual disability. And that's what made this project, a totally different ballgame to me. I've never experienced anything like it before. And it was also to do, and we worked very closely together with this group. The thing is that because they have an intellectual disability, they all look like grown-ups, but they think like children. And that's where you can make a lot of wrong assumptions. And that's what we did also, of course. Because you think, well, they will understand it, and nope, they don't. So we had to work closely together to create things that they would understand and they would be able to use. What we did together with them is exploring the possibilities of voice. And we did so by creating some things for the Google Home. And we found out very early that the thing they thought they were missing out on a lot was playing games. There are, a few games available when you're blind, but not much, especially when you also have an intellectual disability. There's almost nothing you can do. So we decided to create some games together for the Google Home. And the first ones we created evolved around a concept of guess the sound. And I don't know if you know what guess the sound is, but in the Netherlands, it's a very popular radio game. And as simple as you hear a sound and you have to guess what it is. And just for the fun, let's play 3 rounds of guess the sound. Do you know what this is? This is the sound of somebody adjusting an office chair. Let's play another one. What is this? Slightly more difficult. This was the sound of somebody putting on diving goggles. And just for the fun, one more. What is this? This was a mouse trap. So this is, it can be fun to play, and it's very easy to create it for the Google Home. But we took it a step further. We created the possibility for them to create their own guess the sound games. So we created an interface for an iPhone, because that's what a lot of them seem to be using, where they could just push a button, start a recording, listen to the recording, and then add the answers, 1 good answer, 2 wrong answers, and that's all. And it was all uploaded to a game where you would hear 5 random sounds in 1 round. But while we had a lot of sessions together, and the idea came up that it should be more adventurous and more fun, this guess the sound game. So that's why we created 3 prototypes of a more adventurous and more fun way to play a guess the sound game, evolving around different themes. We created one adventure in space, a detective story, and a pirate game. And I'll let you listen to the introduction of the pirate game. So this is just a small introduction. And there's a lot going on here where we made assumptions and we made the wrong assumptions. Because you hear a lot of things, there's a lot of things going on here. We stacked layers of sound to create something adventurous and funny, and and this is where we went, where we did wrong the first thing. It was too much. It was too much to listen to, and it was also well. It also we came to a point where one of the team members got afraid. Well, that was not what we want, of course. So we had to cut out a lot of sounds and make it slower, and because we also the pace was way too high. Probably a habit that we we used to trying to put as much stuff as possible in a short amount of time. That's not going to work with this group. You have to take it slow. You have to explain things sometimes maybe 3, sometimes maybe even more times. And that's difficult if you're not used to that. Another thing was that we thought to make it easier on ourselves and also for our audience was we used multiple choice option. That's easy because if you have to program for voice against open questions, it's a hell of a job. So we thought it would be easy, but it's also easier to, answer a question if it's multiple choice. So we did A, B, C, D questions, which seemed like an obvious choice. Not if your audience doesn't know the alphabet. Part of the team didn't even know the alphabet. So A, B, C, D was a really bad choice. And also, when we arrived at option D, some of them already forgot what option A and B were. So what seemed to be the obvious choice for us was not obvious at all. During this project, I kept in mind the words from Caron. And Caron was someone I interviewed a few years ago who also has an intellectual disability. And he showed me how we were struggling with finding things on the internet. And I was sitting next to him. Everything he did, I thought every time that it was very obvious where he had to go, where he had to look for. And he explained to me that what was obvious to me was clearly not obvious to him. And this was something I remember during the whole process here also, because if it's simple to you, it's not necessarily simple to anyone else. And that is why you have to incorporate the people you are creating your app or your website or whatever you're creating for during the process and involve them in any possible way. So let's head back to where we started. Better quality of apps throughout, better quality of life through apps. Also better quality of apps. That's what we have to make because, if it works, it's not enough. Is it possible for us to create something for someone else if this person is experienced to your app or whatever you create in a totally different way? Yes, it is possible, but you have to be aware that you are, if this person is not around you, you probably are making a lot of assumptions. And most of the time they are wrong, because being blind is not the same as closing your eyes and doing stuff. That's something completely different. It's, of course, you may think it's like that, but it is not. Being deaf is not, having an impairment is not putting your hands over your ears. So talk to these people. Just the easiest way is just invite someone over and challenge your assumptions. Show them, let them listen to, or let them experience whatever you are making. And just ask them, how is this for you? And what do you want? It's easy as that. So that's the one lesson I hope you will take home with you. Whatever you're creating, invite people over. That's all. And to finish off, I like to describe another picture for you, just like in the beginning. In this picture, again, you see two people. On the left is you. On the right is another person. And this person is struggling with your latest project. Why? Because maybe they can't see it, they can't hear it, or maybe they have difficulties with having the right interface, of using the interface you created. And I see that you're thinking, what can I do to create an awesome experience for this person. I don't have this picture. If you have it, please share it with me. And please also share your ideas on how we can create awesome stuff for everyone. You can reach me here. That was all for today. I want to thank you for bearing with me all this time. And I hope at least it was a bit entertaining and otherwise educational. And if you have any questions, this is the time to ask them. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. I have a question about SenseMath. What is the input format for SenseMath?
Sorry, the input?
The input.
You mean how do you enter a formula, or?
Yes.
Oh, that depends on the user, of course. If you use a Braille reader or whatever, Braille input, that's possible. But anything you can attach to a iPhone, the iPhone itself. I don't know if that answers your question.
I work with a lot of books. I'm giving a little bit too much information about myself. I work with a lot of books for higher education publishers. So we often work in MathML, for example. Is that the sort of thing that would go into that, or it's just text or LaTeX?
We use MathML for the output, if that's what you mean. So we use MathML to display the format correctly. There's also an option to not show the MathML, because the issue is that if you are, I haven't even talked about, but like I said, there's so much more to it. If you are a student, you are used to, entering a formula with your keyboard. But if you're a teacher, you want the student to learn it the right way. So if you're a student, for example, you enter x squared like x caret 2. And that's also what you hear when it's read out to you, x caret 2. Unless you put it in MathML, but because students are used to this, to hear it like this, to hear it like x caret 2, and then not a minus, but or not a slash or a dash instead of a division, or so we offered both options. So what I showed you today was the MathML option. But you can also, next to it, we offer the option that's more familiar to students, because that's the way they, are used to listen to it every day. Maybe that's more detail than you needed, but.
Thank you. That was a really interesting talk. Thank you. I am not seeing a lot of questions come in, but why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in inclusive design?
It's a long way back. It all started with a project where someone asked me, "Hey, we have to do something about accessibility," and then I realized that this could be my way of doing something really useful with my skills. And it's easy as that. I just wanted to, like one of my colleagues always said, in the end, you want to make a little scratch on the planet. This is probably my scratch. I think, I'm a software engineer, and I want to use my skills for good. And I see there's still a lot going wrong when it comes to accessibility. And I'm working really hard to be the best software engineer on that part, but also to convince others that this is something we should fix, because the internet is broken right now for some people. That's the answer.
Thank you. I'm seeing a comment in a language I don't speak.
Okay.
But
can I see it, or?
I can paste it in for you, perhaps. I don't know that it's going to work.
Oh, I don't see it right now.
It's on Twitter. perhaps we'll have to leave it for later. I see
okay.
a lot of people quoting you: invite someone over and challenge your assumptions, let them experience what you are making, ask them, how is this for you and what do you want? I think that that's a really important point to drive home.
Exactly.
And that is what you'd like us all to walk away with.
Yeah, exactly that.
Are there any resources that you can recommend for people to learn more about this, in particular, how you might go about working with people who require accessible websites? Well, we all require accessible websites, don't we? People with disabilities. How can we go about that testing with people with disabilities? That's something that can be a little bit difficult to work toward.
Research is not, that's difficult questions. I always say, well, I think you learn the most from the people themselves. Just because there is so much to learn. I'm not a voiceover user, so if I see someone use voiceover, that's already so much information I have to digest. So invite someone over and show them how they use voiceover, or just people. That's the best research you can do, I think. Yeah, and otherwise there's also a lot of internet. You can find people who write about it. This conference is great for that part. So attend this kind of conferences and talk to people who experience the world in a totally different way than yourself. So talk to fellow humans. That's my, that is it.
And you say reach out to people. I found that it's not always so easy to find people. You can't just say, hey, I need a blind person for testing. How did you find people with disabilities to help you with testing? And how would you recommend that?
Well, it starts with asking the question, just asking someone, okay, I'm doing this project, I need someone. That's years ago. Right now, I have the luxury of working with Visio, for example. So I have access to a lot of people who are blind or have a visual impairment. But I know what you mean, because there's also a big part of my audience that I'm not able to reach. And I'm also, well, I'm just asking these questions. And just recently somebody came up to me and said, okay, what are you looking for? Because I'm at a school where a lot of people with different impairments are working. So just tell me what you need. And I can ask them to come over, and that's awesome. So you just have to ask the question and don't be afraid to sound rude, or just ask the question. Say, I need people because I want to create something great for you, and help me because I know nothing. That's the easiest way.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it back to Eric now.
Yeah, Johan, I wanted to say again, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed that. And for those of you out there tuning in, if you like this session, hit that YouTube like button. And don't forget that you can also subscribe to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 to be kept in the loop for future events like this one. Also, a reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and that you can find our code of conduct linked to on the Inclusive Design 24 website. Our sponsors for Inclusive Design 24 are brought with thanks, and that includes Intopia, Fable, TPGI ARC, Adobe, Tetralogical, Intuit, InfoAxia, the Center for Inclusive Design, Web Directions AAA, Adrian Roselli LLC, and Ken Access. Inclusive Design 24 will be back on the hour with our next session. See y'all then.